So to create better outcomes, we have to create the right governmental and legal frameworks. How do we make better policy? How do we implement it effectively? Michal Nakmeni is on a mission to organize, analyze, and democratize data on climate laws and policy using data science and augmented intelligence with her startup Climate Policy Radar. Before founding Climate Policy Radar, she spent 10 years at London School of Economics Grantham Research Institute, leading work to build evidence-based decision-making tools for national legislation and policy and for low carbon and responsible investment. Please welcome Michal.
You're well caffeinated, right? And you're still not in the drinks phase, so we're doing okay. So we have a mammoth task, including coping with these lights in my eyes right now. And the mammoth task, of course, is doing all the things that all the wonderful speakers ahead of me and all of you who are working daily on climate know that we need to do, which is stop emitting, remove all the carbon that we already put into the atmosphere, adapt to the damage that we've already done, and compensate for the damages and the loss that cannot be repaired anymore. So we're talking numbers and investment. So $3 to $6 trillion annually until 2050 in order to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. That's the investment needed. And another $1 trillion to deal with adaptation, which is building our seawalls and building our flood defenses and our early warning systems and our health systems that will have to cope with people who are more ill, and capacity building in villages that now have to deal with having to do all of their food systems differently, and all of the things that you have to do when you take a planet and you change it and you put it on its head a little bit. And of course, another $1.9 trillion in order to deal with the biodiversity loss, because climate and biodiversity are interlinked challenges, and we cannot talk about climate without talking about biodiversity. This is has been a very climate-focused day with wonderful glimpses of nature. We need to start saying the same. We need to start beginning to say the two in the same sentence. So we asked earlier, I think one of my previous speakers asked, what will make the change? Is it behavior change or is it technology? And I would like to suggest a third, that a lot of this is policy. A lot of this will be enabled. The biggest levers that we can pull are policy levers. Why policy levers? Because policy is everywhere. Policy is everywhere because in order to, let's go back to Sadiq Khan's talk this morning. In order to get cities cleaned up, we need to ask ourselves, what are the planning and zoning regulations? How can we encourage innovation to make sure that electric vehicles are cheaper than fossil fuel vehicles? What do we need to do in order to regulate the shape of the plug that will go in so we don't have to work too hard at buying something that was manufactured in one place and then sold in another place? What are the incentives for parking? What are the incentives for car sharing? What are the incentives for all of those things? And the circles go bigger and bigger with health and with infrastructure, and all of these things go through policy. What are the R&D support mechanisms that enable us to build all of the incredible innovations that are represented out here and in many other wonderful climate tech forums outside? So we need better laws. We need better laws, we need better policies, we need better regulations. So we need a big policy-making mechanism happening. We also need to hold policymakers to account because they're not doing a good enough job. We probably also need to hold corporates to account for not doing their job well enough. Some of them blatantly lie. Some of them blatantly ignore what has been known for decades. I'm not doing the fun, happy, clappy talk of everyone's doing okay and we'll be fine. We will be fine, but we have to work hard for it. What you're seeing here is the photo of the victory of Mille de Fancy against Shell. So citizens suing Shell for violating human rights, for not having strong enough commitments, and for continuing to pump up carbon into the atmosphere. We also need to track policies. We need to understand, even if we have the best intention at heart, where is our intention needed? A few years ago, when I was working at the LSE, we did a simple count. We asked how many policies are there just in the UK that deal with energy. There were about 26 at the time. And how many that deal with agriculture? There was one at the time. This is with the transition to a low-carbon agricultural system. How many of the emissions were attributed to the energy sector? Exactly the same like they were to the agricultural sector. But we weren't paying enough attention, and we weren't putting enough attention, and we definitely weren't putting enough money at the time into the right sectors. So figuring out who's doing what and where do we need to work more is really important. And risk modeling. Risk modeling is critical because when we think about investment, we got pretty good at modeling physical risk, which means we sort of know when the hurricane is coming. We're getting good at evaluating if a coastal line is about to be habitable or not about to be habitable. Does it make sense to build a hotel there, or does it not make sense to build a hotel there? What we don't know, and we're not tracking well enough, is what is the climate policy risk that is associated with that. So the hurricane coming, okay, is there an early warning system? We're not doing the full count. And we're not taking policy and litigation risks into account. If you're investing, lending, or insuring anyone now, you need to take these into account. When Farmers Insurance pulled out of Florida, they didn't do it because Florida is the only place that is becoming uninsurable. They did it because it was a combination of Florida becoming uninsurable and a political landscape that did not allow for anything to be improved there. So these decisions need to be made. Let's only talk about policy making. They need to be made by lots of actors, by countries, by states, by cities, by corporates, by investors, by lenders, by insurers. But these are really complicated decisions. If I ask you to open a climate policy document, you probably need a PhD to read it. Even those of us who have those sometimes struggle to understand what that means to us. Things are interlinked. You can't talk about energy without talking about transportation, without talking about materials, without talking about human rights, without talking about many other things. So when we ask ourselves, how can we decarbonize really quickly, we need to ask ourselves very complex and interlinked questions. And that's really scary. And what do we do when we're scared? We freeze. We stay in the same place. And we have a crazy status quo bias. When we don't have enough data, we don't move. Now, to qualify, when we have the right data, it does not ensure that we move in the right direction or in the right pace. But the lack of data or bad data definitely doesn't help us at all. So let's go and find climate policies. Great, where should we start? Anyone who's ever tried to understand what is the regulatory landscape that is relevant to their company, whether they are building new materials and asking, what are the incentives that I can have here? Can I build a factory here? What are the regulations that impact me? Is usually faced with lots of websites that are in lots of different languages and that are that you're not really sure, is this policy in force, is this policy not in force? Where do I find it? And once you find it, you actually have to read it. And resources that don't make sense to invest sometimes, and if you think about legal departments or a small army of research assistants that you do in order to make any decision. And I think many of the people that we've spoke to today and many of the people I've been speaking to over the last 15 years face the same problem. They have to find the documents, they're PDFs, they're in lots of languages, you have to open them, and you have to find your way through them. And we still haven't found a good way to do so. So I'm not just offering you thoughts, I've come here to offer you thoughts and a tool that I hope that you will take with you. So what do? We put all the things in one place. We help make sense of them so everyone can make better decisions. And what does that mean? And we use augmented intelligence. I use a different acronym for AI because what does augmented intelligence mean? So we already know that humans have a problem when they're faced with a lot of data that is unstructured and messy, and you have to ask yourself, who's doing what? Clicker, there we go. We also know that if we say, hey, ChatGPT, what are the best renewable policies out there? We're unlikely to get a good and reliable answer. Because when you ask a general language model, or when you ask the internet something, those are not credible data sources. Those hallucinate. Those do all sorts of things that we really don't want to insert and bring into our decision making. When we marry a human expertise and domain expertise, when we take a human-centered approach to teaching machines how to read stuff faster and make sense of them faster, which really is what artificial intelligence is, then we can get decent solutions. So what did we do at Climate Policy Radar? We went and we gathered, together with our good friends at the LSE, at the UN, and in various other research institutes, all of the climate laws and policies and strategies and action plans that every single government in this world has on its books. We also put there all of the documents that every government and other stakeholders have submitted to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. All of their commitments. By 2030, we will reduce our emissions. These are our deforestation policy challenges and so on. There's 470,000 pages in there, or 4.5 million paragraphs if you wish. So I'm going to do a demo, and I'm inviting you to take out your phones and look at app.climatepolicyradar.org now or later, and do the same thing for whatever is relevant to you. So here I looked at emissions from shipping, a really relevant and important thing to look at. Who's dealing with emissions from shipping all over the world? So you can see that the carbon budget order from the UK has something about it, and the low carbon transport innovation strategy, and something from Togo, and something from Mexico. So let's look at that something from Mexico. If I click on it, I will see that there are 10 matches here, and you can see that the greenhouse gas emissions from national marine and river shipping came up. By the way, I asked for shipping, it gave me marine, because it also knows how to do semantically related terms. Because if I look for electric vehicles, and then I have to look for electric cars, and then I have to look for EVs, and then I have to look for electric transportation, I'm using up more and more resources and time, and that usually decreases my chance of actually getting it done. So semantically related searches. And if I click on that, it will take me directly to the paragraph on page 85 of Mexico's National Inventory Report, somewhere on the right-hand side that is highlighted. Those of you who are sitting close or have great eyesight will know that this is a document in Spanish that is auto-translated. The chance that somebody will know, Mexico said this in this document, and will actually go and find that and have it auto-translated is pretty low. So by opening up, we've just searched with 5,000 documents, anyone who ever talked about marine transportation from all over the world. Great. Now what? We can see everything that Mexico has done. Now, just as a taster, here we've just compiled all of the documents from Mexico. So we have like Mexico as a central entity. We could also have shipping as a central entity and say who's saying what about shipping, and generate maps and timelines and references and whatever business intelligence layer we need in order to answer our questions. The next thing is a knowledge graph. What is a knowledge graph? A knowledge graph is what happens when you type something into Google and you get all of this structured information. I typed Antonio Guterres' name, the Secretary General of the United Nations, of course, and I got his photos, and I got his age, and I got his office, and his website, and his latest tweets, and his latest, and his Wikipedia page. That is structured information that was collected and arranged, and I don't have to do anything special because the request and the requirements for what is the structured data were predetermined, and now all I have to do is populate it. So extracting this structure is what we need in order to answer basic questions. Imagine those like Lego blocks from which we make up those fancy things that make us, that make the buildings that make our questions. So here, for example, and this is a project that we did in collaboration with the United Nations for their last negotiation round, we asked, what are those building blocks that we can help answer questions? I think here we looked for heat pumps and subsidy. I put subsidies in the search term. So all of the subsidies for heat pumps that were mentioned in these documents will come up here. Think of the possibilities for answering complex questions here. and think of all the possibilities that we can then package them into nice little analyses and maps and timelines and everything that we need in order to answer our big questions. So Climate Policy Radar, we offer open resources. These are free, okay? They're constantly updated. The structured data and the business intelligence layer that we're developing on top of that. But the main thing is that we offer a community of practitioners working together to build this even bigger and better. So we're radical collaborators, and this is an open invitation to any of you who have new data sets, who think of new ways to structure the data in a way that will help not only you but also others, because we can't walk this road alone. And of course, we need to bring this through credible channels to the decision makers, whoever they are. The twist on this story is that we are a not-for-profit startup, and this is I think we're a rare beast in this ecosystem, and that is not passing judgment on anyone who is for-profit. For-profit is not bad. Except being not-for-profit in this space lends us, first of all, credibility. When people ask what are the policies and somebody's paying you to do so, people start questioning your motivations. We find that being a not-for-profit and open source organization lends greater credibility to our work. The second thing is there's a really strong climate justice element to this. The people who need the data the most are the ones least able to pay for it. By offering this data source as a public good, we actively shrink those information asymmetries and reduce them. Of course, open source conducts a springboard for innovation. Think about the COVID vaccinations that were built on top of academic knowledge of an open RNA database that enabled innovations that are for-profit and paid for, and that's questionable, of course, but that open database is critical for that. And finally, one of the big challenges of large language models in particular, and of data curation specifically, is biases. And if we don't expose our models and don't open up and don't offer people the ability to look under the hood, then we're reducing the ability to spot those biases and to correct them. So this is an open invitation to go and poke at our models and go and poke at our data sets and tell us you've missed that and you've measured that wrong and so on. Climate change is now, biodiversity, health, anything to reduce human suffering. All of those go a long way through public policies and through corporate policies. And we're just in the beginning of our journey. Thank you very much. That's it.